Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. It's a beautiful day. I am attempting to recover from pinch a nerve in my back, so I'm kind of hobbling and a little gimped, but that's fine. I can't just lay around and do nothing, so I finally have a usable engine block for the 302 project. And this is where we need to start. I've never done cam bearings before, but from what I understand, they're not rocket appliances. So let's get to it. Now it's easiest to do this, obviously, with the block upside down, and I've got it slid all the way in clear to the back right there. See? Just poking through a little bit. Now, I got to get a wrench that fits that, and I'll be right back. Also, when you buy cam bearings, see how they're all numbered in here? So it tells you 1 through 5 which one goes where. And if I remember right, 5 is the back of the block and 1 is the front. But they are in the box as they go in the block. So this one here has B88 right there. B88 right there. I don't know if you guys can pick that up or not. And then this one's 87, this one's 86, yada yada yada. You could tell which one is the front of the motor because the front of the motor will have 2 oiling holes in it. The rest of them just have 1 big one. Now these are non-directionals, as far as I know, non-directionals, which makes them quite a bit easier to install when you don't have to worry about the direction that they go. You know what I'm saying? The only thing you actually need to pay attention to when you're installing your cam bearings is to make sure that this little slot right here lines up with this oil passage here. You can take a flashlight, shine down in there. You can take a zip tie and push it down through there, or you can just eyeball it, because that, here, let me show you. You see how much wider this groove is in that little hole? That's your margin for error. There we go. So you got a little bit of room to screw around with, but take your time lining these up. Make sure you get it right, because if you don't, your bearings aren't going to last very long because you're not going to get oil through them. So, okay, now I've knocked out 2 of them, and I'm going to show you how I did those 2. This. So that's the end of my tool. You slide it in there until your ridges hit the end of your block right there. There we go, right there. Okay. Sorry I can't get you in there farther, but you stop when the ridges hit the back of your bearing. Make sure you put your cone thing in back here for stabilization, and it keeps them straight, you know. You take your wrench and just tighten that thing all the way down till it's tight. Not like uber tight. You don't need to torque it or nothing, but tight. Then I got I believe this is a 4-pound. I don't know. Some people say use a big hammer. Some people say it doesn't matter. Try not to get too aggressive with it, because what you'll end up doing is knocking the tool into the bearing that you just replaced. And I'm not trying to do that. Wrench on there. back your bolt all the way out. And there is my old cam bearing. Slide your bearing down in there, put it on your tool there, and make sure that you butt it up against the back of the tool right here. Let's see if I can get you in there and show you. Butt your bearing all the way up against this edge right here. Once you get your bearing all butted up in there, take your wrench and tighten your tool down. Like I said, tighten it until it's snug, not super tight. Put the cone in the front up here, light through this hole. So this second hole is what you want to line your the slot of your bearing up with. And remember, you do have that 1/2 inch or whatever of slot to play with, or not slot, but 1/2 inch of groove in that bearing to play with. Now, a lot of people say just run it until your bearing is flush with the inside of your block right there. Which, mine, you can see just a little bit of the silver still. So now, I'm going to pull the tool back out, and we're going to have a little look-see to see where we made it. Take our light. Now, let's see how well this new fancy camera is going to pick this up. Look down in that hole. See how you can still kind of see. You can see about half the circle has light through it. You can only see half of that circle. Tells me that the bearing is not in there all the way. So we're going to put our tool back in. Give her another little whack-a-do. Right there. I know I said 1, but I gave it 2. That's okay. Is that rule number, was it rule number 13 or something? Is double tap? That's what I did. If you're doing cam bearings, take your time. You should not be trying to hurry yourself through something as intricate as cam bearings, because if it's not done right, they're not lined up right, they're not in all the way, they're out, whatever, then 1, you're going to wear them out prematurely. 2, you're probably not going to get very good oil pressure, which, you know, I shouldn't have to tell you guys, but low oil pressure will absolutely destroy your engine. Now we see down in there that we can see the slot on both sides. That bearing is fully installed. See how it's flush back here. I didn't even realize that. But now I've showed you guys how to do one very poorly, I guess. Also, a good practice I do is every time I finish with a bearing, I clean this off with some brake parts cleaner and just wipe it off with a rag, because it gets a lot of shit stuck to it while you're knocking these bearings in and out. Now, you remember I told you guys on the front bearing there's 2 oil holes instead of just the one. There's the one that lines up here, and then this hole right here, there's a little oil hole right inside there. So this one has to be exact. This groove here has an oil hole in it, and this hole right here does too. So you have to make 100% sure that you're lined up on both of these holes before you drive your front bearing. Now onto this rear one, because I don't have a socket big enough to just knock that one in, but I do have 2 hammers. Not like that. Don't do that. Okay, what in tarnation? Maybe the 2 hammers method is not the right way to do this. Nope, there it went. And the same rule applies here as the freeze plugs that I put in the side of the block in the last video. Because if you drive this one in too far, your camshaft's going to rub it, and it's going to end up rubbing a hole in it. So right here, I'm actually a little too deep. So I'm going to take a chunk of pipe and feed it in through the other side and just knock this back to level. But that's it. Alright, now that we've got our cam bearings changed and our freeze plugs all changed, it's time to open up the rebuild kit. We have crank bearings, main bearings, not crank, main bearings. So we've got the mains here. There's your number. And if you notice, plus, remember that leverage conversation I was just telling you about? Once you get it in there a certain distance, you just reach your hand down in here and pick up on your cam and get it locked in. Now, spins nice and free. Okay, now that we have our cam installed, you can see right here on the motor, I don't know if you guys can pick it up or not, but there's some leftover oil from being embedded in these letters right here, because this says back bottom, which means this faces the back of the engine and this is the bottom. See the lettering right there that says bottom? Means this goes right back in there. Now, one of these has a groove, one of them does not. The one with the groove goes in the block side, the one that does not goes in your cap. This, our main bearings here, make sure they're nice and clean. There's no debris on them or anything. On both sides. And on your bearing they have this tang, I believe is what that's called. In the block you have a notch right here. So it's really kind of hard to screw this up, or impossible to screw this up. You just push them into place. And don't ever oil between your bearing and your block. Don't do that. I've seen some videos where they say, you know, put lubrication between the bearing and the motor. Don't do that. Okay. When it's time to polish the crank, I have 400 here, and it's wet or dry sandpaper. So you just take and cut you a strip about as wide as your journal there. See? About as wide. Mine's a little narrower, but that's fine. Don't worry about that. Take some WD-40 and lubricate your paper. You just go to sanding. And you're not trying to turn this into chrome. You're just trying to take all the nasty shit off of it and give it a little bit of a bite, you know? Polish time. I do not have like metal specific polish. I have like aluminum polish and stainless polish and all kinds of shit like that. But I do have this. I'm hoping that it'll work. We're going to try it anyway. Just break off a piece of the wadding, rub it on the material, and just keep working it in. I know, I didn't pick a very good spot to do an example, but it's fine. Now, I'm going to take and cut my microfiber, just like I did with my sandpaper. Now that I've already used the wad polish on the back end of this here, we're just going to run this back and forth, just like we did the sandpaper. It's pretty missing a little bit right here, so we're going to come back with the wad, polish this up some more. Now there's not much to building an engine that you can hurry your way through if you want it done decently well and you want it to run for a while. You're going to have to just take your time. Sometimes you're going to have to come back and do things twice, but I personally would much rather do it twice while the engine's in pieces in my carport than have to pull it back out of the truck and, you know, do all the things again. Pretty good finish. Time to set this in there. Got it all polished up and pretty. All that fun stuff. Do not drop it in here. Take your time, be careful. Once you set it in here, don't rotate it because your bearings are dry. You don't want to rotate your crank on dry bearings because then you'll start to scar them and they'll prematurely wear out and fail, and you know, you get it. But this is the part that has to be done. This is what you need for bearing clearances. This is a plasti gauge, and it's basically like, let's see if I can get this apart for you. It's pretty much just like floss in here, maybe. Okay, well, it came apart. It's this stuff right here. It's basically just floss, but it's plastic. You take your plastic gauge and you set it here on your channels. And I have to do this for every single one of these. But now that I have that in place, grab my number 1, which is here, just a couple of bolts, and get it started in here. Careful not to move your plastic gauge. What this plastic gauge does is it'll, when you tighten this down, it compresses your bearings around your crank, and it'll tell you how much tolerance you have for oil to slip through that passage in there. Okay. Torque on these is, I believe, 60 to 70 foot-pounds on the mains. So we're going to start at 40 with the torque wrench and just run them in. Uh-oh. My battery might be dead. Never jerk on your torque wrench because it's going to give you a false reading. Make sure it's a nice sweeping motion. That's how you get your correct torque. Sneak up on it. Like that. Hit it again. Finally, we're going to go to 65. This is our final. Okay. There is our torque. Now, we have to break them all loose, pull all the caps back off, and check the thickness of our plastic gauge, because when you tighten these caps down, that piece of plastic gauge I stuck in here will actually expand from the pressure of the bearing smashing down onto the crank. And the width of that is going to tell us how much tolerance we have between each of the bearings and the crank itself. When your plastic gauge isn't frozen, you have to cut the packaging in these intervals, and that tells you, because there's a bunch of numbers on here, that's your tolerances that it's supposed to be within, right? Every engine manufacturer has different specifications for theirs. But for this one, a Ford 302, it should be between 15 and 2 thousandths. All right, guys, I was wrong. Initially, the research I did was on the 85 motor that I tore apart, and the tolerances on that motor were way tighter than this one. So the tolerances for the 85 motor were between 15 and 2 thou. The tolerances for this one, which is a 79, you can tell that because it says 79 right there. Also, I ran the numbers, and it came out of a 79 Bronco, and Anyway, the tolerances on a 79 are between 1 thou and 2 thou. And according to these guys, this one is too small for 1, dead on at 15, which is perfect. This one's my thrust bearing, and it's pretty much dead on at 1. So all of my bearings here, this one's number 1. Number 1 is right at 1 thou. Number 2 is, we'll call it right on at 1 too. So this motor is completely within tolerance, and that's awesome considering these are not the caps that came out of the motor. They are in that bin right there. So now I'm going to slather up some bearings, because now that I've got my tolerances measured and I know everything is within spec, I can go ahead and slop all these bearings in, plop the crank down in, set the caps on, and I will be done for the day because it is cold out here and my hands are done. So apply a liberal coat of this stuff to your bearing surface. Some people say you can't do too much, but I'm always kind of afraid of plugging up or blocking off an oil passage or something stupid. So I try to not go overboard with it, Probably doesn't matter, but also if you're working with this, wear gloves, because this shit is sticky and nasty. It gets all of your clothes and everything. Try to walk around the crank here. So number 3, put some on the bearing itself. And make sure, again, make sure you apply it liberally. But you get down here on the sides, because this is your thrust bearing, and the crank will ride on these outside parts right here. So, don't forget that step. Thrust bearings need love too, Craig. Get the sides of it. It really is getting cold as hell out here. I mean, it's been chilly and kind of windy all day today, but it's not bad because I'm in the carport and it kind of blocks the wind depending on the direction that it's blowing, you know. But sun started going down and it is really dropping fast out here. So lucky I'm almost done. Engine side bearings are all lubricated. Now just pick your crank back up. And again, don't drop it in, but, you know, drop it in. Now, it's time to lubricate some bearings and send them home. Don't worry about your plastic gauge. Like, you don't need to clean it off or none of that shit. It's oil soluble, so it will break down within a few strokes of the crank. We're going to get these guys all set and ready to go. So, to do that, we're going to measure out our ring gaps and get everything lined up and ready to go, and I'll show you guys how to put rings on and all that fancy stuff. So here, got my rings laid out. So the top groove, second groove, and the oiler, right? And this, here, this is our correct layout. There we go. So this is the front of the engine, right? Which you can tell on these pistons because they have that little notch right there. That's the front. So your top groove, or your top ring, is in the 12 o'clock position. Your second groove is in the 6 o'clock position. Your oil ring can be either 11 or 2, either one. And your oil retainers, which are these little tiny thin things, have to be here at 8 and 5. So they have to be oriented in some variation of this pattern here. So they're, see how my top and my second are 180 degrees away from each other? That's how they, and you get good compression. So I'm going to go ahead and start this one and I'll show you. So you can do piston rings by hand, or you could pick up a pair of these little pliers. They're cheap. I think I picked those up for like $9 from CarQuest. There. Is that better? You guys can see it better? Oh yeah. Okay, here's the front. So I'm going to take my oil ring, this little waffle looking deal, and just set it in there. And then these ones are actually really easy. These little thin guys are really easy to get in place because they're thin. They're kind of flimsier. Drop down in there, you go. Okay. Now, oil rings are done, right? Take my second ring, the one that has the word top on it. Does not mean it's the top ring, it's just the one that goes, it's the part of the ring that goes up. I gotta clean this piston out a little bit. I'll be right back. Figured I better do a little explaining here. So, you get carbon buildup and all kinds of nasty shit in these piston ring grooves right here. See? And if you're doing this yourself at home and you're on a budget, this is a perfect time, or a perfect way to do this. So the old rings that I took off, I broke a couple of them in half, and these make fantastic cleaning tools. You can do this by hand, like I said. Just take and push your ring in there with your thumb, and you kind of have to push around the edges, and it'll walk itself right down in there. Easy peasy. But piston rings are very sharp, so don't put your finger on the edge of the ring and start pulling, because it will cut the shit out of you. Or you can do this, and these, the top rings don't have an indicator of top or bottom, so they're not specific. So you can buy these pliers for like $8 at any parts store. And then walk it down in there. All ringed up and ready to go in, but maybe I will put them in. I was going to say I can't put them in because the crank's not tightened down, but that doesn't matter. So should we put pistons in? Maybe we'll drop them in. Okay. All of our rings are in place. Now I'm just going to go through and snap all the bearings in the connecting rods. Same as in the main bearings though. Make sure your journals are nice and clean. You have all the old oil and everything out of the way. Open up the box. Open up the box, and they look the same, except the difference between these and the crank bearings is neither one of these has the groove in it or a hole in it, because they get oiled from the crank. The crank has holes where these pistons sit. The groove, or sorry, I was trying to line up my tang in the groove, that oil these bearings. So that's it. Just sit them in there. Same. Bearings are good to go. All my piston bearings are installed. Now it's time to oil up the rings, bring you guys over there with me, and see if we can start dropping pistons in, shall we? This is the fun part. This is where you actually can see your progress, and it starts to feel like you're actually doing something, you know? So this is the good part. This is the fun stuff. Got my piston here, and what I usually do to protect my crank is I got a couple of pieces of just fuel line or vacuum hose or whatever. Just slide it down on the studs here. That way, as you're driving this into the cylinder, it doesn't slam into your crank and scar it up where your bearing's going to sit. Right here on the number 5. Chevy, this would be number 1, but Ford, this is number 5. One's over here. So we're going to start right here on number 5, and I'm just going to rotate my crank until the lobe of my crank is the farthest away from this hole that it possibly can be, right? Now, we're going to double check the orientation of our rings. Lubricate the top side of our bearing. Can't lubricate the cap yet because we need to plastic gauge the tolerance but I do lubricate the piston side. Now, you can buy these at Harbor Freight, or, you know, just any parts store basically will sell these cheap ones. You can get the expensive ones, but if you're like me and you don't do a ton of engine stuff, there's no point. I just take a little bit of oil, put it in here, just to prevent the rings from sticking in. Because mine's been stuck in the smaller position for so long, I have to kind of hold it and fight it open. Make sure the notch faces the front of the engine and get it down. I go about halfway down the wrist pin there. Just crank that boy down. It should have all your rings compressed where they need to sit. Crank this guy down right here, like that. And you shouldn't see a gap anywhere around your piston, between your piston and the tool, right? And I take and slide this down. See, almost goofed up already. That's the front. Stupid. Put the piston down in there. And try to get just the very bottom edge of your tool inside your bore. Like this, so I don't knock it over. So a little angle. And just take something like a dead blow. Now turn it over. And you can either push it down from the top or flip it over and pull it down from the bottom, which is what I've opted to do. We're going to take a piece of plastic gauge, stick it right here on the bore, and we're going to plastic gauge this piston. But you guys saw yesterday, I had a smash for plastic gauge. So I'll just come back when I get it smashed and I'll show you. As you can see, got a good smash on the plastic gauge there. And these are supposed to be between 15 and 2. And it's a little bit, well, this camera doesn't show close up very well. It's a little bit between 15 and 2, which is perfect. So now I'm going to take some of that nasty stuff and slather up where I put this bearing, put it in, and final torque that piston. I think I'm going to go ahead and torque down all my mains as well. I'm going to go ahead and rotate the motor over and make sure it spins freely. Do that after every piston you install. Go ahead and rotate the engine just to make sure that it doesn't hang up or catch on anything, because you don't want that. If it hangs up or catches on something, that means your tolerances are wrong or your piston's in the wrong direction. I've got all of my driver's side pistons installed, and I'm working on the passenger side right now. So this one here is number 1. So I set it in there, and now I'm going to torque the caps to check for my plastic gauge. Been kind of just cruising out here trying to get it done before it gets dark. I'm torquing these at 24 foot-pounds, which I believe is correct. Now it's time to check my plastic gauge there. Let's see. How'd we do? Dead on at 2,000. check it out. This makes number 8 to be installed, which means I'm about to have a completed rotating assembly. There she is. Now let's give her a spinny spin. Let's go back the other way. Yep, I'm going to call that a win. Rotates all the way around. Don't have any sticky spots. Nothing. That is a completed rotating assembly and or short block, depending on who you talk to. So, I'm so happy I got that done today. I wasn't sure I was going to have the time, but here we are. Now, there's probably better, smarter ways I could have done that, but I'm not better or smarter, so it worked for me, and it worked really well. All the plastic gauge checked out. Every piston in the, well, every connecting rod plastic gauged out at 2 thou, exactly 2 thou. So if you've made it to this point, thank you for sticking around. Hopefully you learned something. There's definitely better ways to do that, and I keep hearing people say there's one way to build an engine and that's the right way, but I say that's not entirely true. The best way to build an engine is the way that you do it. It's either going to work or it's not. That's it. Those are your only two outcomes. In the the world we live in, there's so much information out there on YouTube. You could literally just watch a series of YouTube videos and do this yourself. It's pretty easy. I mean, it's not easy, but it's easy to watch a bunch of videos and learn some stuff. So, yeah, next video you see will more than likely be working on these. Again, another thing I've never done before, but can be that bad, right? We're going to pull the valve springs off of those, lap the valves a little bit, change the valve seats, valve seals, and get them ready to drop on the motor. So now that we have a fully assembled short block here, it should go pretty easy from here on out. Also, still need to put in the oil pump and things like that, but that's another video. I had to change the crank and the main caps because the ones that I originally had in there, though they plastic gauged out perfect and they were mic'd and everything all nice, once I torqued the caps down, it didn't rotate. So I switched the crank and the main caps and it worked perfectly. So, is what it is, it's the way she goes. So, like the video, sub to the channel. Hopefully it's educational and entertaining. So there's probably going to be some more of this stuff coming up as far as like the long form content goes, because I actually enjoy making longer videos. It's just often I cut out so much shit that doesn't really need to be in the videos. So this is going to be all informational. So again, rambling, sorry. But, yeah. Remember, guys, your dreams aren't going to work unless you do. So even if you don't know what you're doing, watch a couple videos and tear some shit apart. Pay attention when it comes apart because you'll figure out how to put it back together. Okay, bye.